I've spent a lot of time scrolling through cheap starter amps that promised a world of tone for the price of a pizza, only to end up with a tinny buzz that made my chords sound like they were being played through a hallway speaker. The disappointment kicks in when you finally get home, plug in, and realize the low-end unit can't handle a little overdrive, let alone the clean sparkle you heard in the demo videos. That's why I wanted to see if the Fender 68 Custom Vibro Champ Reverb actually lives up to its reputation as a smarter buy, instead of another regret-filled impulse. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I first unboxed the amp, the first thing I noticed was its classic Fender styling. The tweed-inspired grille, the simple control layout, and the solid chassis all scream vintage credibility. But the real question for any potential buyer, especially those who have already been burned by underpowered practice amps, is whether this little 5-watt unit can deliver usable tones in a typical home rehearsal space, a small gig, or even a bedroom recording setup. The Fender 68 Custom is a tube amp that rides on a single 6v6 power tube paired with a single 12AX7 preamp tube. That tube combo is the heart of the original Vibro Champ line, and it gives you that warm, slightly compressed breakup that's been a staple of blues and early rock for decades. In practice, the amp produces a surprisingly full-bodied clean tone that sits nicely in the mid-range without sounding thin, which is something many cheap solid-state 5-watt amps miss. Turn the volume up a notch and you'll hit that sweet spot where the tube starts to sing, adding a subtle harmonic richness that feels organic rather than synthetic. One practical strength I've seen come into play for friends who use the amp in different scenarios. For a bedroom songwriter who just needs a clean platform for fingerpicking and subtle overdrive, the 5-watt output is perfect, loud enough to be heard over a small acoustic drum kit, but low enough to avoid swamping a tiny room. For a small coffee shop gig, the amp can actually cut through the ambient chatter, especially when you pull the vibro switch and let the built-in reverb add depth. The reverb, while modest, adds a sense of space that you'd otherwise need a larger amp or external unit to achieve. It's not a stadium-sized hall effect, but for intimate settings it feels right on the money. The control panel is intentionally minimal: volume, tone, and a dedicated vibro reverb knob. That simplicity is both a blessing and a curse depending on your expectations. If you like to tweak a lot of parameters, mid-boost, presence, or adjustable gain, this amp won't cater to that. On the flip side, the straightforward layout removes any confusion for beginners who just want a plug-and-play experience. The tone knob covers a useful range from warm bluesy lows to brighter cuts that can sit nicely with a Fender Strat or Telecaster. The reverb knob is subtly engaged. Turn it up too far and you'll get a smeared wash, but a moderate setting adds a gentle ambience that works well for ballads or lo-fi indie tracks. Now, let's talk about the hidden trade-offs. Because this is a tube amp, you do have to factor in the warm-up time. It takes about a minute for the tubes to reach full operating temperature, which can be a minor inconvenience if you're in a hurry. Also, tube amps can be a bit more finicky when you move them around. The Fender 68 Custom's chassis is sturdy, but the weight, though manageable for a 5-watt amp, means you'll want a stable surface when you're swapping chords or repositioning the amp during a session. You'll also notice a slight hiss when the amp is idle. That's just the nature of tube circuitry and not a defect, but it's something that can be audible in very quiet recording environments. Who should buy this amp? If you're a guitarist who values tone over sheer volume, especially someone who leans toward blues, classic rock, or indie folk, this is a solid match. It's also a good fit for players who already own a larger amp for gigs but want a portable, low-output companion for practice and songwriting. The AMP's reverb and tubed warmth give you a lot of character without needing pedals or external effects, which can simplify a small rig. On the other hand, if you're chasing high-gain metal tones, need a massive clean headroom for large venues, or want a multi-channel amp with extensive EQ options, you'll likely be better served by a larger, more feature-rich model. The 5-watt limitation is not a flaw, it's a design choice, but it does mean you won't be able to dominate a big room without cranking the volume and risking unwanted distortion. Another practical consideration is the built-in speaker. Fender paired the amp with a 7-inch speaker that's calibrated to complement the 6v6 tonal profile. The result is a focused, punchy sound that emphasizes the mid-range, which is great for cut-through on a small stage.